The Toxic Masculinity Hoax: How Science is Being Used to Pathologize Half the Human Race. Part 1. The Modern War on Manhood. Friends, colleagues, and curious minds, we are gathered here to discuss a term that has become a linguistic parasite. It's in our schools, our HR handbooks, and our therapy rooms. The term is toxic masculinity. On the surface, it sounds like a noble effort. We are told it's just a way to address violence, emotional repression, and bullying. Who could be against that? But if you look deeper, if you look at the evolutionary biology, the clinical data, and the history, you find something far more troubling. You find that toxic masculinity is not a scientific construct. It is a rhetorical weapon used to pathologize the very essence of manhood. Today, I'm going to show you that this concept is fundamentally false. It is biologically ignorant, sociologically sloppy, and clinically dangerous. We aren't just fixing men. We are creating a mental health crisis by telling boys that their natural architecture is a disease. Part 2. The Stolen History of Toxic. To understand why we are here, we have to look at where this term came from. Most people think it was invented by modern gender theorists. That's a lie. It was actually coined by Shepherd Bliss, a leader in the Mythopoetic men's movement in the 1980s. Bliss didn't hate masculinity, he loved it. He used the term toxic to describe what happened to men when they were separated from their deep ancestral nature by the industrial machine and father absence. Let's look at how the meaning of this term has been hijacked over the last 40 years. The evolution of a term. In the 1980s, the Mythopoetic movement saw the cause of male problems as industrialization and the loss of ritual. They defined toxicity as a man who was numb and disconnected from his soul. Their solution? Go into the woods, find your deep masculinity, and learn to be a fierce but generative provider. Today, popular discourse has flipped this on its head. Now, the cause is labeled as patriarchy and inherent male entitlement. Toxicity is no longer a loss of the self, but an expression of traditional male norms. The solution they offer is deconstruction, essentially telling men to be less masculine. The difference is staggering. Bliss wanted to help men find their deep masculinity, the unheralded goodness of men who fight fires, till the soil, and protect families. Modern critics want to eliminate that very energy, calling it exclusionary. When you remove deep masculinity from the equation, men are left with only two choices: be toxic or be non-masculine. Part 3. The Logic of a Flawed Construct. In science, if a term is going to be useful, it has to have construct validity. It has to mean something specific. Toxic masculinity fails this test because of conceptual stretching. If a man commits a murder, it's toxic masculinity. If a man refuses to go to the doctor for a checkup, it's toxic masculinity. If a man interrupts someone in a meeting, it's toxic masculinity. When a word explains everything, it explains nothing. Lumping criminal violence with social etiquette is a category error. It implies that a man who doesn't cry at a movie is on the same pathology spectrum as a domestic abuser. This isn't just bad science, it's clinical malpractice. The Motte and Bailey fallacy. Proponents of the term use a rhetorical trick called the Motte and Bailey. The motto is the easy-to-defend position. We only mean the bad behaviors like violence. Everyone agrees violence is bad, so they feel safe in the motto. But the Bailey is the vast territory where they actually use the term. They use it to attack competitiveness, risk-taking, and stoicism, traits that are not inherently toxic but are essential to male identity. When you call them out for attacking manhood, they retreat to the motto. Why are you so defensive? We just hate violence. But the moment you look away, they are back in the Bailey, shaming a boy for wanting to win a race or a man for wanting to be a provider. This is psychological gaslighting on a cultural scale. Part 4. The Evolutionary Reality. Features, not bugs. The strongest evidence against the toxic label comes from evolutionary psychology. What we call toxic is often just a misunderstood biological adaptation. The young male syndrome. Evolutionary psychologists Wilson and Daly identified the young male syndrome. Throughout human history, young men have been the risk takers. Why? Because of intrasexual selection. In the ancestral environment, high-status men had more offspring. To get status, you had to take risks. You had to compete. This isn't a social construct. It's millions of years of selection pressure. When a boy wants to wrestle or a young man wants to engage in high-risk sports, he isn't being toxic. He is responding to an ancient biological drive to demonstrate competence and somatic integrity, the mismatch hypothesis. Instead of toxicity, we should be talking about mismatch. A trait that was essential for survival in a tribal world, like high physical energy and stoic resilience, is often out of place in a 21st century cubicle. But mismatched is not the same as toxic. A peacock's tail makes it vulnerable to predators, but we don't call it a toxic tail. We recognize it as an evolved signal. Why is the human male the only creature whose evolved traits are treated as a moral failing? Part 5. Honor culture versus masculinity. A massive mistake in this discourse is conflating honor culture with masculinity itself. Sociologist Richard Nisbet found that violence in men is often tied to environments where the law is weak. In a culture of honor, your reputation is your only shield. If someone steals from you or insults you and you don't react, you are signaling that you are a target. The culture of honor comparison. When we look at toxic masculinity, we are told violence comes from male entitlement or patriarchy. This model is universal and implies all traditional men are a problem. However, it has very low predictive power because most traditional men are never violent. When we look at the culture of honor model, we see that violence is a rational deterrence strategy for survival in specific environments. This model is specific to certain geographic and social groups, and it actually predicts behavior accurately. The toxic label is often used by white-collar elites to pathologize the survival strategies of working-class and minority men. It is a classist tool masquerading as a social virtue. Part 6. The clinical harm, the deficit model. In 2018, the American Psychological Association released guidelines stating that traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful. This was a catastrophic mistake. It created a deficit model of manhood. Gamma bias. Psychologists John Barry and Martin Seeger describe gamma bias. This is a cognitive distortion where we magnify the negative things men do and minimize the positive. When a man acts out, we blame his masculinity. But when a male soldier jumps on a grenade to save his friends, or a father works 3 jobs to feed his kids, we call it humanity or duty. We never credit his masculinity for his sacrifice. This bias skews our data and convinces boys that the only thing masculine about them is their potential for evil. The truth about Stoicism. We are told men need to be more vulnerable and expressive, but research shows that Stoicism, emotional command, is linked to higher resilience. For men in high-stress roles, compartmentalization is a healthy coping mechanism, not a pathology. By pathologizing Stoicism, we are robbing men of their primary tool for handling crisis without offering a viable alternative. Part 7. The Void and the Manosphere. What happens when you tell a whole generation of boys that their nature is toxic? You create a void. If the only 2 options are you are a broken toxic patriarch or you are a non-masculine ally, many boys will choose a 3rd option. This is why we see the rise of the Manosphere and influencers like Andrew Tate. These figures aren't successful because they are evil. They are successful because they are the only ones offering a reconstructive narrative. They tell boys, it's okay to be strong. It's okay to want to win. If the mainstream only offers critique and the fringes offer validation, the fringes will always win. Part 8. The Path to Reconstruction. We need to stop deconstructing and start reconstructing. We need to move from toxic masculinity to positive masculinity, the reconstructive shift. Let's look at how we can reframe these traits. Stoicism. Stop calling it emotional constipation. Start calling it resilience, the ability to stay calm so you can help others. Aggression. Stop calling it violence. Start calling it fierceness, the energy needed to overcome obstacles and protect the weak. Competitiveness. Stop calling it insecurity. Start calling it ambition, the drive to innovate and provide for the community. The protector role. Stop calling it benevolent sexism. Start calling it pro-social responsibility, the willingness to sacrifice oneself for the safety of the group. The men's sheds model. Look at the men's sheds movement. It's a global success because it accepts that men connect shoulder to shoulder while working rather than face to face while talking. By honoring the male mode of connection, these spaces have drastically reduced male suicide and isolation without ever using the word toxic. Conclusion: a call for intellectual honesty. The idea of toxic masculinity is false. It is biologically ignorant. It is sociologically imprecise. It is clinically counterproductive. It is time to move past this era of pathologization. We must recognize that men are not defective women or broken patriarchs. They are a distinct half of the human species with unique challenges and incredible strengths. If we want to help men, we must stop telling them they are the problem. We must invite them to be the solution. We must recover the deep masculinity that builds, protects, and sustains. Thank you.